We've got the car up in the air and we've got the under trays off just so we can start accessing all the stuff we need to undo underneath. So we're going to take this boost pipe off because I left the cylinder heads off with the turbocharger still on. And I'll disconnect all of these turbo pipes as well. So we've got the, I think it's the oil return there, oil feed I think, and we've got a coolant one I think somewhere. This one's the coolant one. So we'll disconnect all of those. We've obviously got to have all the timing cover off to get the chain off because we're going to be replacing that anyway. That's our cause of our problem. We're going to be moving the front end forwards, so we'll need to access stuff like this and whatnot, and all the bumper bolts, etc. So yeah, we'll probably obviously going to be here draining the coolant as well. So just up in the air, getting those things out of the way. We'll drain the oil. And yeah, we'll just get this prepped for removal of this cylinder head. So that's where we're going with this now. So the customer has okayed us to go ahead, and we're going to be getting this thing, getting this fixed up. So yeah, we'll video the process. Hopefully we can make a good couple of videos for you. So we're just dropping the oil out of it now, and while that's draining, we're just going to undo a few more things. So this 13mm bolt here is the support for the turbocharger. So rather than undo it up here and struggle, these bolts are always quite seized in there because as you think that's bolting through the exhaust housing, lots of heat cycles, etc. Under this 13 we can lift the turbo with the cylinder head, and we'll get those 8mm or 8 size spines off as well. Got these lines disconnected, all the bolts all out, so they're able to now just drain. Got the bolt out of the turbo support, and we've got the boost pipe off of the turbo outlet also. So we'll just let this drain for a little bit and we'll pick up after that. We're going to undo this banjo fitting up here. So we've got the strut bracer off from here, so we've got two 13 nuts, 13 bolts, same over that side, and then two 10mm nuts holding that onto this removable piece of bulkhead. So that's out of our way, nice and simple. We've got our front bumper removed, popped our ambient air temp sensor off the front of the grille. So this really is simple. I've done this in another video where I did a timing chain on one of these Q5s, but I'll just give a quick outline. A couple of T25s at the top here. Once this panel is popped off, just some rivets that pop it on, push the centers through, pop the rivets out, lift the panel off, access these bolts, undo those, 4 T30s across the bottom of the bumper, the T25s that run down the wheel arch liner, and that's it. Pop it out of the wheel, pop it out of the bottom of the wing or the guard, whatever you want to call it here. So I've got these bolts out from in here, 3 each side, so 2 at the bottom. Like I say, I've shown this before in another video. So yeah, I'm just going to give you a brief outlook. 2 T30 each side of the car here also. We'll just undo these ones here on the top on each side as well. Then we can pull it forwards. One thing we've got to be careful of is this bonnet cable. If it comes apart, we need to be aware of it. So we've got the front forwards a little bit. Gives us a fair bit more room. We can pull it forwards more if we really want to. But I'm happy with that at the moment. So we're going to have to get that crank bolt undone, obviously get this off at the top. There is a special tool in the middle there. We'll rip all this stuff off and get that lower cover off once that crank bolt's out, and then we can inspect this chain and see what the issue is and why this where this has jumped. So I've got the crank pulley off. As you can see, the crank bolt is spun back in. That is how we have to go about it. You have to spin that bolt back in. I've gone around the whole timing cover and undone all the Torx 30 bolts around the perimeter of the cover, so we'll knock that off with a paint scraper in a minute. And I've got my filter cap on ready to take the filter off when we pull the head. I've started undoing the wiring loom down here. We'll have to go underneath and just pop the one off that goes to the oil level sensor in the sump. because we're going to try and throw this wiring loom just a little bit out of the way, just to get the head off and leave the loom behind. We'll next move on to doing these exhaust nuts, I think, and we'll have to obviously unbolt the inlet manifold support from the bottom of the inlet manifold and to the block. We've got the front end forwards quite a considerable amount more just to give us that access, so we can really work on this rather easily. I got all this bearing assembly off the front. The spool valve was very tight to come undone, so we'll probably be replacing that. So yeah, we're getting there. I'll get this cover off and we'll join you back up just so we can see what the situation is with the chain and why this has happened. So I'm underneath now and I'm just taking off this timing cover, and what I use is a paint scraper and just punch it all in through here. As you can see, there is now a gap. I actually just cut the sealant and I get about a third of the way around, and then I can just put a pry bar in there and pop it off and it will come off easily. If you try and lever this off with just a pry bar and a small gap, you'll bend the cover and then you'll never get it to seal again. And very easily now I managed to be able to pry that cover off. We'll be able to get into the chain. So we'll lower the car down now and we'll just look in. Now we've got this chain cover off and we'll be able to see what's going on and what's caused this scenario. So we now have all the covers off and we can see what's going on very clearly now. This gap here between here and here is very small. The tensioner is very far extended. These indicate that the timing chain has stretched or lengthened. So it doesn't actually stretch, it just wears on all the pins and all the rollers, the links, etc. So yeah, this gap is very tight. Well, remember this gap when we go to reassemble it. I can just about get my thumb in that gap now. And this is out, what do we got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, I think 8 teeth I can see sticking out. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah, I'm pretty certain there's 8 teeth. There's also something going on underneath this clasp here. So this is the reason why these tensioners can fail. It does look like the detent under there might have lifted up, or it might be broken or something like that, I'm not sure. So yeah, you can get a good look there at the amount of teeth sticking out. That is probably twice as much as it will be when we put it all back together. This will only be stuck out probably about to here, halfway along this at 10 mil, so that's probably out 15-20 mil at the moment. We'll detension this chain and inspect what's going on with this tensioner maybe, or maybe I'll just pop this straight off just so we can have a look, see what the state of that is. So I've just got my pry bar down in between the chains. There is a special tool I know that bolts onto the cylinder head, and you can do exactly the same thing to detension the chain. All I'm trying to do is I just want to see, because there's something suspicious going on here under this clasp, I want to see if I can just push this chain straight back. If I can, then I know that mechanical element in there isn't locking this tensioner, and that's what our problem is, along with the stretch chain. So that does push back, but it does hold, so that is working correctly. I'd say our problem is due to the stretch chain. The chain is just loose. If we look up here, look how loose that chain is coming. So every time that you crank the engine, you're going to get a bit of pushback onto this tensioner, and that's why there's that mechanical element there to stop it going all the way back. That's as far as I can get it to go. We'll just make sure of that. Yep. So yeah, it's not due to the actual tensioner itself failing, because I can't push it back any further than that. So that is working in there. It's not the tensioner that's actually failed in this case, even though it is the old school tensioner renowned for all their problems. It is due to this stretch chain. That's why this tensioner is massively extended. There is only a certain amount of teeth. I think it is on its last tooth, and I think that's our problem, because this chain is so lengthened. And like I say, you get this amount of free play that's normal, but then you also have a stretched chain. So then, like, this shouldn't be slack like this. So our usual procedure here, detension this chain, is we're going to put our tool in. So I'm just using a straight pick. You can use a pin, you can use whatever you want. It's just to lift that detent up, and then we should be able to push this tensioner all the way back, like so. So that's what a defective chain tensioner would do. And then when this is all the way seated back in, we can then put a pin in there. So we'll get that pushed back and get a pin in, and then we'll remove that tension and we'll inspect it on the bench. So I pushed the tensioner piston all the way back. We have to force out some of the oil that's inside of it. It's pretty normal. And then we've put our pin into the bottom of it, so which is my pick again. So you can see that. So there you can see that pick is going into the underside of the tensioner, which will show when it comes off. You can also see the part number there on the screen. That's the original tensioner. And you can see now how much gap there is between these two rails. That gap, you can see, we can now see how big that gap is between these two rails with the detention chain. So you can just imagine, like, if that was only 10 millimeters out, we would have that much of a gap, roughly. Whereas we were a long way out, and I could only just get my thumb between here. So yeah. Anyway, let's get all this disassembled and we'll see what this tensioner looks like on the bench. So we've got all that chain drive assembly removed now. So all our sprockets are all open, so we can have a quick look at those. Now in this case they are actually in good condition, so we're not too worried about the sprockets themselves. Same at the crank end. Only minor wear. Got all the guides out. There is some damage to the guides, which we'll show also. Yeah, so we'll move over to that now. So just looking at the guides, see this chunk that's missing, and the same down here also, and the same on the back of the rail. So our next step is going to be pulling the head off this now and assessing the damage that's been caused to the inside of the engine. We'll look at the piston crowns and how bent the valves are and what valves are bent, etc. And if there's any damage to the cams also we need to be looking at. So yeah, the next step is going to get this head off. So those Torx 30s along the front of the cylinder head we'll be doing. We'll get in all the ancillaries off the back, so our vacuum pump assemblies, all that sort of stuff we'll have to disconnect. We'll have the PCV all off. And yeah, we'll get to the head bolts. We'll probably pull the cams out in situ, just because we're going to struggle getting to the head bolts without rotating that inlet camshaft, because as we can see, this one is up, pointing upwards, or about 11 o'clock, which is fine with me, and I'll be able to get to the head bolts down past the cutouts in the cams. Not so much on this inlet, so there is no way I'm going to get down past this camshaft to get to the head bolts that are below it, because the cam is in the wrong place. If we look at the position there, it's down there about 4 to 5 o'clock, whereas it should be up about 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock. So that's going to be a problem for us. So we probably, like I say, we've got to have the cams out anyway. So probably we'll pull the cams, inspect the cams, and undo our head bolts with it like that. So normally we would just take these out and have all the PCV all these off, and we can then get to all the head bolts basically when the camshaft is out of the way. So you can only see half of that head bolt down there because the cam is in the wrong place. So we've got this PCV off. Already starting to see some problems as to what's to be found inside this engine. So we've got a rocker on the inlet side which is fallen off, so that means that that valve is likely to have been bent, and we've got another one down here. We'll have to strip and assess, but you can see now why I was saying about how you can't get those head bolts that are down there, because the recess that allows the tool to go and the head bolt to go past is in the wrong place. So we need to turn back that camshaft 90, 100 degrees, something like that, to get it in line. Whereas this one, you can see it's lining up reasonably well. So we'll try and get those head bolts undone. Maybe we will turn that cam back just so I can show you the correct way to undo this without having to take the rocker cover off, using these access screw holes. So yeah, that's where we're at. So broken rockers at the moment. So I've returned the inlet camshaft to near enough the TDC point, so our exhaust is up and our intake is up. And what we've then found is there's actually some damage to the camshaft lobes. So you can see this horrible score, and then there's also scoring to this one as well, obviously where those rockers have hit, not on the roller edge but on the edge of the rocker itself. Same as that one that's down there. So yeah, it's decent enough damage. And then on closer inspection we can also see lots of markings where the chain has been loose on these intake sprockets and the exhaust sprocket. Now these sprockets aren't available separately, you have to buy the camshaft. So that's just got it on the trailing edge and not on the leading edge so much. Same deal looks to be on the inlet, a little bit more on the trailing, on the leading edge, but more predominantly on the trailing. And then if we go down to the crankshaft, that inner sprocket, you can see this is very sharp across the back. You can see the shape of the teeth, it's completely out, so that sprocket's going to have to be replaced. Luckily this unbolts. If I took that bolt off from this chain, this just comes straight off the nose of the crank. The oil pump's chain looks to be that it's left a little bit of an imprint as well. So we'll report all this to the customer. At a minimum this needs to be replaced. I don't know what's going to happen with that camshaft yet, but it all needs to be reported to the customer. We can even see wear on the inner sprocket for the balance shaft chain. So this has been left way too long. Now this was all reported to the customer with regards to the timing chain being lengthened about 3 months prior at the previous service, and they've continued to drive the vehicle. I believe it was something like -6.5 degrees correction factor, kW, on the end of the measured value block. So yeah, way past where we'd want to be seeing it. We monitor these at every service, and the customer obviously didn't listen to the advice that was given to them, or didn't have the money or whatever, and now it's going to cost them probably 4 or 5 times the amount they might have gotten away at the time with just a chain swap.